Welcome to Real Herbalism Radio, show 255, recorded at Big Dog Studios in Eugene, Oregon. Today's show is made possible by Sacred Blossom Farm, artisan teas grown and blended to support health and taste delicious. Get yours at sacredblossomfarm.com. Now, here are your hosts.
I'm Candace Hunter.
I'm Patrick Hunter.
And welcome to Real Herbalism Radio.
Oh, Bet's a whirlwind of free thought and free thinking, isn't she?
She is. You know, it's interesting how she, I think, embodies the psychedelic mushroom movement in so many ways. I've been watching the news and what's been happening with how things like we legalized it here in Oregon for therapeutic use. Mm-hmm. And it seems like one thing after another. It's not just us. I mean, we legalized it, and there's like supposedly going to be maybe a retreat center that's going to be doing psychedelic mushroom retreats here.
Yeah, they do ketamine retreats here.
I know. I was like,
what?
Oh, that sounds a little scary. It's like got a murder mystery show or something.
The guy that does these Psilocybin retreats does them in Jamaica right now.
Yeah.
And he's looking forward to being able to bring them home.
Yeah.
Which is cool too, because they grow here.
Yeah, I know. They grow.
In fact, I saw some pictures of them.
Some of the local...
and I was like, hey, I've seen those in the woods.
Oh, yeah. We've seen them frequently. In fact, there's one that I'm like, there's this one particular mushroom that calls to me every time I'm in the woods. And I think of it as being a little bit on the edge of an LBM, so I don't, investigate.
LBM's a little brown mushroom for people that don't know.
Yeah, there's a lot of them, and they're hard to identify. There's so many species, and some are really poisonous and some are not.
Besides, they don't really stir up fry good anyway, like a chanterelle, so we just don't get those.
Right. But, and that it's the same one every time I'm there. And I was looking at a mushroom growing place that has like spores and stuff for scientific study, of course.
And the air quotes are up.
Yeah, it's that mycelium. Yeah. But they were showing, the different mushrooms like oysters and different ones that, you can spawn, and psilocybins were amongst them. And I was like, hey, that's that little mushroom I see in the woods all the time that always calls.
Yeah. No, I didn't know that that's what it was, because like I said, I've seen them too.
Yeah. So I think the idea of having retreats, mushroom retreats, is a really interesting one. I read an article in the Washington Post called Will Psychedelic Mushroom Vacations Come to the U.S. by Jen Rose Smith. Yeah. That was in early January. And I kind of was like, hey, that sounds like that could be kind of cool. The idea of doing that sounded really interesting.
Well, the way that the law has been, the law that we voted on, approved.
Yeah.
The wording didn't really seem to match up to retreats. It was more along the lines of in a more of a clinical setting.
Part of why I thought it was a potentially good good law was that the definition of the clinical setting was purposefully left very ambiguous. And the way that, like in the Washington Post article, the person, the individual that they, who went on retreat and was talking about, or that they interviewed about her experience, the way that she talked about it, it sounded like it fit very much into the idea of therapy and clinical setting without having to feel like you're in a plastic fantastic hospital or something that distances you from nature. Although what I've read about other retreat centers, or the variety that are available now, is that some are very, in the woods, making fire on the ground types of very, naturalistic. Right. And others are very much in a very clinical, spa-like retreat center type of thing where, you're got a lot of distance from nature, but the area, the environment is very relaxing and like high-end European spa kind of thing. And so it hits a wide variety, but in all of them, they talk about things like integration and doing, having a guide. Essentially, the therapist or the doctor who's leading the retreats usually is essentially a guide, right, to help you have framework while you're working with the mushrooms, so that you don't end up having, what the hippies of old used to call a bad trip. Yeah,
well, I mean, I have to be honest with that too. Is that that's the thing that holds me back from even trying these things, is I just don't want to do that.
The fear of a bad trip.
The fear of that, especially, I just don't want it.
Well, I've seen a lot of articles saying, in exclamation points, don't self-medicate with psilocybin mushrooms. And, the reality is that if you're dealing with any psychological issue, I'm going to put something like PTSD or addiction or trauma out there, but whatever it may be, garden level depression, whatever, that psychological issue you've got is there because there's something very uncomfortable and unpleasant that is somewhere in your closet. And it's frightening to deal with that stuff. And psychedelic mushrooms may very well bring that into the open. And I don't know how easy or hard it might be to face whatever it is that was causing that problem in the first place.
Right.
I mean, there's a reason why you stuffed it back in that closet.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
Yeah. I found it interesting that all of the different articles, I mean, I've been reading, a lot. It looks like there's a new stock index that's being launched.
Well, I don't. Well, yeah. I mean, I read the same article, but I didn't realize it was a new market. I thought it was, yeah. Well, no. Okay, so the Horizon Psychedelic Stock Index, ETF, or Psych, PSYK, will begin trading on the NEO exchange next week. So I guess it would be a psychedelic stock index.
Yeah. Yeah, and that same company did a cannabis stock index.
I've got my Robinhood account. Maybe I need to go and get some go invest some money in some
magic
of these
mushrooms.
things. Yeah.
Well, but I mean,
to sidetrack, we have friends that have done that. When the marijuana industry was just cranking, the Canadian stocks went through the roof.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Yeah, well, I mean, that what that tells to me in mushroom speak is that's the indication of mycelium proliferating the ground. That's what that index tells you, is that, wow, there's a lot of business that's going to be starting to grow up as a result of just this one door opening.
Oh, well, yeah. The thing is that it's when it becomes commercial, that's when it starts to break the bigger boundaries. I mean, you think about where we were at 3 or 4 years ago with even Oregon legalizing it, which was the third or fourth state. Now I think there's 14 or 15 states
with cannabis. You're talking about
with cannabis that have legalized cannabis, and there's even more. So it's like we were talking before the show. It's not a matter of if; it's just a matter of when.
It's when, yeah.
And in fact, I think wasn't it Washington D.C. that on one of our news articles that we were researching has voted to legalize psilocybin?
I think that, if I remember right, yeah.
So and there's in the nation's capital, yo.
Yes, and Florida. I mean, Florida is one of the more conservative states.
Yeah, but there's a lot of old people down there.
Well, yeah, and one of the things that psilocybin mushrooms are being used for in a therapeutic setting is for end of life care. For helping people who are terminal,
right,
have a better experience for the last bit that they've got here and be better prepared and ready to cross over.
Yeah,
that's big.
I think it is interesting and exciting, these new realms of treatment for psychological issues like end of life and those types of things. And I'm not sure if even it's a matter of end of life or acceptance or end of life, because oftentimes when we're at end of life, we're not necessarily, especially if you're in a hospice situation, you're not living out your best days.
Right? Yeah.
But take that with the promising studies that they have with PTSD and psilocybin, the studies of
addiction recovery,
massive addiction recovery. In fact, there was one on 60 Minutes last year where they were talking about drug addiction and alcohol addiction and even smoking.
Yeah,
they were able to cost a session of each of these addictions in patients who were having
tried
everything else and nothing was working. And yet, after a few treatments, like the smoker, after a few treatments, he was done smoking.
Yeah.
And
And
he-
really done.
Yeah,
I mean,
and really
actually
done. Now, I don't know what his trip was, if he had a trip,
Right. Yeah.
but I know it was only
Mm.
microdosing. It wasn't like,
Right.
they're giving a baggie
Some-
full of mushrooms and go to town.
Yeah, I was going to say some of the therapies are higher doses, some are lower
Right.
doses. I mean, I found it really fascinating that they're starting to recognize how powerful psychedelic mushrooms can be for dealing with depression and anxiety and of all levels. I mean, not even just the severe stuff, but the trauma that we just normal people, average people go through with the simple basics of life, like making enough money to cover the bills and the taxes and keep a roof over your head and, fighting with your kids about whatever the latest thing is they want or
Right.
don't want, all of that stuff can create such stress and essentially a trauma in the body to the point where you can end up with anxiety and depression resulting. And, obviously much worse things can happen. And I find it fascinating that the mushrooms can help people deal with all of that.
Yeah, for sure. It's encouraging. The other thing too that's really encouraging about it is that from all accounts, it doesn't seem like psilocybin has an addiction or addictive quality unto itself.
No, they say that cannabis is not addictive. And based on the many people I know who use cannabis, I would say that it is not as addictive as tobacco or alcohol might be. But definitely certain individuals seem to not do their work, as it were. And they find them, I notice that they keep coming back to the cannabis over and over and over instead of integrating their experiences in a way that allows them to live happily without it. So it seems to me like it becomes a bit of a crutch.
Well, they're self-medicating, really.
Yeah. Yeah.
And people do it with alcohol. They do it with,
Yeah.
other drugs, and they do it with marijuana, of course.
And the cannabis people that I know that have used it that way, they are easier to deal with than those who are addicted to alcohol or tobacco often, because they tend to have a more laid back, relaxed attitude while
Right.
they're on their substance. But it's still an addiction in my mind.
Yeah, I haven't never heard of an angry pothead.
Not really. No.
versus the
No.
angry drunk.
No.
So
And I mean, there are people that use cannabis habitually, like for pain, for instance.
right.
And I don't see that as an addiction. Yeah, they're using it habitually for pain. It's not causing damage to their major organ systems. It's not causing serious problems in the rest of their bodies. So it's a pain relief. And if they're using it for severe chronic pain, they're probably not in a position where there's going to be a cure for said severe chronic pain. That's just the way it is.
Mm-hmm.
So that's not really an addiction in my mind. But alcohol used for the same thing kind of is, because it does damage to your major organs.
Yeah, it does. Over time, it definitely does.
And I don't know what psilocybin mushrooms will or won't do.
Well, there's, like everything else, there's really not a lot of research done on it because it's a Schedule I drug. It's right along cocaine and heroin.
Right.
So you can't. There's only a few facilities, if any, that have done any medical research on it, as far as those side effect issues that you're talking about.
Yeah.
So it's hard to know, and until that becomes more prevalent and they start doing those studies, then we'll know. It's like, again, once the door opened for marijuana, research opened.
Research finally opened.
And people, there was more and more research coming about. So that was all. The other thing, part of that too, is the influx of CBD because of it.
Yeah.
That was something that people knew about. It was there. There was a belief that high CBD stuff would help with seizures, epilepsy, those things, but it wasn't really proven out necessarily.
Right.
Well, they've got the research.
Yeah.
Because they could.
Yeah.
I mean, I still think that was funny that the only university in the country that could study marijuana was in Mississippi.
Right. Yeah.
The bastion of academia.
Yeah.
I mean, you're wrong. Ole Miss is probably a good university, but
Yeah.
it just seemed weird to me.
It was
Instead of Berkeley, what?
Yeah. Right. Maybe they thought it would get a little out of hand at Berkeley.
Maybe.
I don't know.
Would you like to deepen your connection with herbs? One way is to join the Herbal Nerd Society. As a member, you'll have influence on topics that we dive into the Practical Herbalist and here on Real Herbalism Radio, along with articles that are catered specifically to you, written every month. If you'd like to get more on herbs and know more about herbs, join the Herbal Nerd Society today by visiting herbalnerdsociety.com. Maybe. Well, the funny thing I think is that the only real government agencies that I have even read about are like the CIA when they were doing studies on LSD, marijuana, and other things in the 60s and early 70s.
Yeah.
For a more of a defense idea or war idea, making people being able to be super soldiers and being able to handle events like their idea was if you're mellow and you're a combat soldier and you're mellow, you could easily go into battle a lot easier than you could if you were the other way. So they were trying lots of different ways. They didn't go about it the best way, of course. They didn't tell people they were doing it. They just did it. There was a lot of crazy stuff that happened, and there's books about it. But that's the only thing I can even think of it on a larger scale research on those types of drugs.
Yeah,
LSD, psilocybin, the other ones. So.
Yeah, I mean, it's something that's been studied somewhat. Psychedelics in general have been studied and have been used and written about, but not necessarily always fully legally approached in our country, at least, or in the United States, at least, for quite a few decades. I mean, I know the 60s and 70s saw a lot of the earlier, I'm going to call them earlier writings on psychedelics, and a culture grew up around it. Mm-hmm. But that was much more, I don't know, and I don't know how to say it, a closeted away culture. You had to kind of have some special passwords to get into that group. Whereas cannabis was always, everybody knew that, of the 10 neighbors you've got around you, at least 6 of them had some weed stashed somewhere.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and as you move, more toward maybe the Bible Belt, maybe it was fewer, I don't know.
Or maybe more. The thing is that you're right. I think if you think about it, where your socially acceptable drugs, alcohol, tobacco, caffeine, socially acceptable, everyone does it.
Yeah.
And then you go down that next level, and I think you're right. It's marijuana.
Cannabis has always been in that level.
Next level. It's who they have, but it's almost like trying to get into a speakeasy back in the day to get into where
the psychedelics, you kind of needed to have the special knock.
Yeah, you got to have a special knock or a special password to get into where the people that have it.
Yeah.
Anyway, that was our experience. Now here in Oregon, they just go in the woods.
Yeah, here in the Oregon. Yeah, you just have to know which ones you're picking.
Exactly. So what do you need a password for? Just go out there.
Yeah, in the woods. By the woods, we mean like the city parks and everything. They're everywhere.
Right. And I mean,
mushrooms,
our experience is massively different than someone that's maybe 10 or 15 years older than us.
Right.
Because we grew up, of course, during the Nancy Reagan Just Say No era, where drugs bad in the drug war. And we've been experiencing the drug war for 30 years. Yeah. It's only now where they're realizing, okay, that was a failure.
Yeah, that didn't work out.
We need to change that.
But that was expensive.
But you and I grew up with that, and that's where we even come into oh boy, this is your brain on drugs. Any questions? I mean, I still remember those commercials.
Oh my God, yes, the frying egg.
Right. So that's the thing that I think is interesting, is that you and I have this perspective that there's these levels, but if we go to our peers that are a little bit older than us, they're like, what are you talking about? It was everywhere. It was all over the place. You could do it whenever you wanted. There was no one busting you. I mean, and I think it's that different realm of it. And that's why I think even now, still, people that are older than us, they're like,
they embraced cannabis pretty rapidly.
Oh yeah, they didn't. Yeah, they never unembraced it, from what I could gather.
Right.
I knew people in Minnesota that I never thought would have done that, and I find out that
Come to find out,
every other day that you're doing it.
they had a stash.
And I was like, wow, I had no idea. Did you ever take a drug test for this job? Well, yeah, they said, but then they just said, well, we just didn't do it for a few days.
Yeah, skip it for 2 weeks, you're good.
And since we didn't have random testing, it was fine. But I think that's just different on a generational context of drugs and drug usage and acceptance.
Yeah, one of the things that worries me a little bit, just as it did with cannabis, is the idea of not approaching it with respect and not approaching it with a little bit of ceremony. Again, not, high ceremony with lots of chanting and stuff like that. Just the respect that, like even now when I take cannabis, I take a moment quietly, maybe, in my mind, maybe, to say thank you. I'm here and I am happy to be here, and thank you to the plant, to spirit for the fact that I can do this. And I see more and more people approaching cannabis like a Coca-Cola. You just take it and, go on with your day and all of that. So it does become much more like a regular drug, like caffeine or tobacco or alcohol. And I don't want to see that happen with psychedelics either. I'm not very happy to see it happening with cannabis. I mean, I think people should be able to take it. I think you should be able to do it and do it as you desire, but I don't like it being treated like just a thing. It is a plant with spirit, and it's a medicine. It is a medicine. Alcohol is actually a medicine, so is tobacco. I don't like the way either of those are treated either.
Definitely. I mean, they move beyond their ritualistic uses, their ceremonial uses.
Yeah.
I mean, I could argue that going to Beer 30 is a ceremony.
For those who don't know, Beer 30 was a weekly gathering of business associates at a local pub.
Pre-COVID. We keep hoping we'll get to go back, but I think that's another year.
We got a ways to go before COVID's done still, I think.
So anyway. But yeah, I agree with you. And, even with marijuana consumption and or usage that we've experienced in the last 3-4 months, I don't know. It's I don't approach it with that idea, of ceremony, but I do approach it with a different level of commitment with it than I do with alcohol. Like if I just have a beer, I don't care. It's just a beer.
Yeah, it becomes a thoughtless thing.
Yeah, it's just a beer.
And that's the part where I'm like, it shouldn't be thoughtless. But
I understand. Well, and to be fair, I do. If it's just, it depends on the type of beer for me, right? Mm-hmm. If it's just a general lazy daisy IPA, I don't care. But if it's like some special stout that's been bourbon aged in a barrel and I savor it. I take my time with it. It's an amazing thing, And with cannabis, because of its effects, because I don't know how I'm going to end up with it, I don't know all this stuff, and I'm still not that experienced with it. I have to really think, okay, I'm not driving after this. I have no plans to work tonight. I have no plans maybe even to work tomorrow for at least half a day because I don't know where I'm going to be at with this. My experiences with it I've had a couple really good positive ones, and I have a couple that are like,
not so positive.
It's not really worth it, So I'm trying to give it that space it desires and not making it a everyday occurrence.
Yeah.
And we know people in our lives that it's, where I used to go into I used to go to the fridge and grab a beer after work. That's just an everyday thing. Mm-hmm. We have friends that's an everyday thing for them.
Yeah. Cannabis is just a daily thing.
A couple smokes, couple puffs when they get home from work, and they're high in that kind of in heightened high state for hours. They just stay there. They don't, every time it kind of comes down a little bit, they go back and refresh a little bit.
Yeah. And I mean, I kind of feel like even that kind of use isn't necessarily a bad thing as long as there's humility and intention, care, thanks, gratitude.
Well,
those things. Those are the parts that are, to me, it seem like that's the part that's really important. It isn't about making a great big ceremony of it.
But I think with psilocybin, because if I treat beer one way, alcohol one way, and I treat marijuana that way with a higher level of respect, I feel like if it was psilocybin, it would be this this once a year thing or once a, where it's a real special moment. It's like, oh, I got to be in a really good headspace for it and really want to give it the time and frame it needs, and not just become, oh, I had a couple drops of mushrooms on the way home after work.
Yeah. Right.
I don't want that. And I guess there's part of me that fears what I could reveal.
What you
to
might
myself.
see. Yeah.
I've heard enough stories and I've seen enough things from movies that would illustrate what it might be like, and kind of scary.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I like Bet's approach. I like the fact that she talks about the difference and knowing the difference between when you're in ceremony and when you're not.
Yeah, that's true.
And what I saw, what it sounded like from her was that she takes mushrooms in ceremony and she takes mushrooms not in ceremony,
Right.
And maybe that is actually okay. And maybe it's okay to do with cannabis and with tobacco and with alcohol. I don't know. I mean, I really don't know. But I do know that for the most part, I tend to feel like it's important for us as a species to remember to be respectful, because we've forgotten and we've left behind general respect for all the other beings and creatures and forms of life that there are on this planet.
Right.
We are not the only ones, not even close to the only ones. And there's so many that live right amongst us, and we're not respectful. So that's where I think, for me, the whole idea that we should all be a little, just taking a moment to think about what we're doing, be mindful of the beer you're drinking. I mean, that's yeasties that created that.
Mm-hmm.
That's special. That isn't something that just you could be walking along and just pick it up and look, here's an apple, here's a beer. No. It doesn't work that way. You really have to ask for alcohol to be created.
Yeah. You're right. It's a process to get there.
And sure that, mushrooms, you may walk around, look, here's some psychedelic mushrooms, let's enjoy that. Sure, that can just happen. But it seems to me that we would be wise as a species to say, hey, thank you. Thank you for this.
Right.
It's an opportunity.
That's true.
Yeah.
It's true.
So it was delightful talking with Bet anyway. I'll admit that I'm much more interested in the idea of trying psilocybins out and exploring that realm.
I am too. And I don't know if you'll do it one time and I'll watch and make sure you're okay. Or,
right.
And I'll do it and you watch and okay. Or we do it together.
Or we'll do a retreat center or something.
Yeah. Or but I don't, right now, I don't. That's not something I'm going to bring into the house yet.
I'm not yet. I mean,
we have an impressionable
young man living with us.
young man who is already interested in that stuff, and I don't want to say, since we use it, as a pass for him too.
Right. Yeah.
So I don't want to do that yet.
Yes.
So maybe I have to wait till he leaves the house.
Yeah. Will he ever? I do find that as the responsibilities of direct parenting and being a caregiver for our son have been lifted, because he's technically an adult and he's getting his own job, and he's becoming adult and starting to move like an adult and manage his own business on his own. Yeah, I still have to be a parent to some extent, but it's just not the same. And that has been opening me up to feeling more comfortable with letting go of old constructs and being willing and interested in exploring where I could go, how I can open my own psyche up a little bit further. I had an idea of what it is to be a mom, and that was what kept me sane for, 18 years while I was parenting.
Right.
And now I can let that go because I don't have to parent in the same way anymore.
Yeah. That's true.
So it should be a very interesting decade ahead for us.
For lots of people.
And not just because of the psilocybins, right, Patrick?
Well, I think Candace is alluding to the fact that we've got something big coming.
Something real big.
Because, we can never just do one thing.
No.
So we are going to launch therealherbmarket.com. And we are looking for, and we only have openings for 25 vendors to be able to be on our herb market. And what we're
For
doing,
our founding
for
vendors.
our founding members for our herb market. And what we're doing is we're giving the opportunity for small independent herbalists to sell their products to a national audience. So if you're familiar with Etsy, a marketplace is like Etsy. So, or Etsy is like any marketplace. We're going to bring a lot of different vendors together, and they're going to be able to sell their products directly to you. But what makes us different, or our marketplace different, is we will actually know, like, and trust our vendors.
Yes.
We're going to talk with them. We're going to interview them. We're going to see what their products are. And once we give them the stamp of approval, if you will, then they'll be able to sell in the store. And if you're a vendor, you're basically going to have a shop that's going to be promoted with the full backbone of support of the Practical Herbalist and Real Herbalism Radio. And I know from talking to some of the small shops that I've worked with for marketing, they're so excited because they've set up their own little shops online, and they get zero sales. They're really excited at the beginning, but they get nothing out of it because they have no marketing backbone. They have no way to promote.
Yeah.
So this is what we're going to be doing. This is really big. It's going to launch this spring. We have 25 members. So if you really want to become a member, and we really encourage you to do it, to get your awesome herbal products to the open market and not have to pay Etsy rates, go ahead and visit us at therealherbmarket.com, and there'll be a small informational page there, and then a form you can fill out to submit, and we'll get them, and there's only 25 seats.
Yep. And for those of you who are not potentially vendors but are interested in getting to know really good herbalists, like, instead of actually making the tea, buy the tea blend, which honestly makes life a lot less stressful at times.
Oh, absolutely.
Or buy that salve. You're going to want to watch therealherbmarket.com, because we'll be building a really wonderful collection of herbalists and herbal products that we've vetted, essentially.
Right.
I mean, we won't be vetting every individual product, but we will be making sure that all of our vendors really do know what they're doing. There's nothing more frustrating, I've found, than going to a site, a marketplace site, whatever it may be, buying a product, getting the product, and realizing that it was not made well because the person that's selling it isn't an herbalist, doesn't really know what they're doing. Or maybe they were an herbalist, but they have gotten so big that they're not making it themselves anymore. They're having some manufacturing plant do it.
Yeah, and that'd be, sometimes that's the goal that people want to get to. With COVID, of course, the multiple ways these small vendors were getting their items out to market was, farmers markets, putting their product in stores. So when, at the store counter, you'd walk up and then you say, oh, there it is. And then, of course, selling in person, and then, of course, online. Well, farmers markets aren't happening barely at all anymore.
Right. Open houses
are done.
The bazaars, all the in-person shopping
is
done.
Yeah. And the only way you're really going to get out there is by doing it online. And the only way you can compete in an online marketplace like we have is to come to a place where we already have the traffic coming.
Yeah.
And that's what we're offering, is that ability to have that traffic coming. And, for the cost of what we're looking at doing, I mean, setting up your own store, which is essentially what we're going to allow you to do, setting up your own store on yourself can cost a couple $100 just to start out.
Yeah, or more.
And we can help you with all the things that you'll need to know.
Yeah.
Like I was just working with a vendor the other day about it.
Yeah. I'm excited to see the list of vendors that we're working with growing. Mm-hmm. I'm excited to be able to offer to customers, to our listeners, to our readers, products that we know are good.
Yep.
And that are practical. I mean, the Practical Herbalist is all about being practical and, knowing what you're doing.
Yep. So if you want to become a vendor, go to therealherbmarket.com, fill out the form, and get the ball rolling. And again, only 25 spots.
Yep.
So with that,
put an herb on it.
The statements made about herbs and products on this podcast have not been evaluated by the United States Food and Drug Administration, FDA, and are not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent disease. All information provided on this podcast or any affiliated websites is for informational purposes only and is not intended as a substitute for advice from your physician or other healthcare professional. You should not use the information on this podcast and its affiliated websites for a diagnosis or treatment of any health problem. Always consult with a healthcare professional before starting any new vitamins, supplements, diet, or exercise program before taking any medication, or if you have or suspect you might have a health problem. Any testimonials, questions, or case studies are based on individual results and do not constitute a guarantee that you will achieve the same results.